Well, the SNC-Lavalin scandal continues to hang over the Trudeau government and SNC itself. The CEO, Neil Bruce, has expressed frustration, suggesting SNC is being used as a puck in a political hockey game. But the company's aggressive actions to resolve its corruption case are one reason why this became a scandal in the first place. And yet, SNC is staying pretty quiet. Should the company be disclosing more information? Let's ask Richard Leblanc. He's a corporate governance expert and a professor at York University. Richard, thanks for joining us. Nice to have you back.
Thank you, John.
On that issue of disclosure and what this company should be disclosing, what's been your opinion on that?
Generally, in simple terms, all information goes to all shareholders at the same time. When you get into trouble is when you have offline conversations with government officials. Many boards will prohibit that because what tends to happen in informal discussions is information is leaked that is material, exaggerations are made. And I'm not suggesting this is the case,
Sure.
but SNC had 18 meetings with the PMO office in the last 2 years. So the board will say, listen, is this something that we wish to be doing? Do we wish to set management and lobbyists loose, exerting influence on the PMO, and then the PMO exerting influence on the Attorney General? And especially when things begin to escalate over a period of months and the Attorney General pushes back and says, you know, I'm within my rights here, and I don't wish to be inappropriately influenced, then the board may step in and say, listen, let us retrench. So
just to clarify, though, the difference between lobbying, which a lot of people say, well, lobbying, that's what companies do. They do plenty of lobbying, and then they meet with government officials. What is the line between lobbying and being aggressively, aggressive activity that's dealing more in that material information that maybe you should be disclosing?
The line is very blurred, and that's the problem, is these notes tend to, the agendas, the minutes, the decisions that are made, the agreements that are made are often not public, and that's part of the problem. So shareholders are saying now, listen, we want complete disclosure of any lobbying activities, anything that could materially affect stock price. There's a class action lawsuit, for example, that is alleging that SNC knew a month earlier before it released the information that it would be criminally prosecuted. So in defense of the hockey puck, if you go to the arena and you put yourself on the ice, then you're engaging in very risky behavior, because there could be a disconnect between what ultimately comes out and what is disclosed to shareholders. And that opens you up to reputation risk, to litigation.
Is there precedent for this? Is there for how SNC should have approached the situation, or are we writing that right now?
Well, very few companies engage in aggressive lobbying. Bombardier, SNC, Irving Shipbuilding, Google, Amazon, these companies had several meetings with the PMO. Most companies don't. Most companies have strict disclosure controls, and they even have codes of conduct prohibiting informal, unofficial meetings. All meetings with government officials have to be official, and they have to be in writing. And that way, there's a consistent disclosure message to shareholders.
Okay, let me take an example. So we keep hearing from members of the Trudeau government about this importance of jobs, and occasionally it slips out that maybe this company's headquarters was going to leave Montreal. The only really strong piece of information we can work off, which was disclosed, was as part of a previous financing through their largest shareholder, the Case.
Right.
There was an agreement in place to maintain their headquarters in Montreal. But this is a primary example. What's that?
For a period of time.
What about 7 years?
2024.
But the company has been fairly quiet. I don't want to say they've said nothing, but they haven't said much about what exactly they were saying behind the scenes on this Montreal headquarters story. So we're left to wonder, well, did SNC say something? Are the politicians making this
Where
up?
did it come from?
Yeah.
And that's my example of you tend to get ahead of yourself when you put pressure on people. And if Trudeau is hanging his hat on jobs, well, that's met with skepticism, because there's jobs for General Motors, jobs in Alberta that have been displaced. So you look at the actual statutes for the Attorney General, she cannot take into consideration jobs. She can't take into consideration economic or political arguments. And what we really have here is a whistleblower. We have someone who's pushing back and saying, and she was demoted. If Mr. Trudeau took these actions in a publicly traded company, which is continuous pressure on auditors or the risk compliance or actuary function, he would be fired. This type of conduct, and people tend to be hanging their hats on, is this illegal conduct? The conduct is it appropriate? It is clearly inappropriate to be repeatedly pressuring someone who's designed to be independent. So this notion of jobs is met with skepticism, and it's also not relevant.
But could you argue that SNC played into that? Even Neil Bruce has come on this station and has dangled the risk of job losses, saying, well, we have been barred from, or we are seeing limited activity in being able to participate in the Canadian system. I mean, this seems like something that SNC chose to do deliberately.
Exactly. They hung their hat on jobs. What they should have done is a more guarded campaign, which is here are the governance and systemic reforms that we've implemented. And once you become very aggressive, it's high risk. There's something called a risk appetite framework that the board would say, are we comfortable? And if we do get very aggressive, do we have a CEO who can manage that crisis? Do we have internal control as a public relations firm in place so that we can manage it once it occurs? And that's not just for SNC, that's for the Prime Minister. So what we have here is lack of disclosure on both sides.
And thank you, Richard. And just to clarify, too, we have a new management and a new board that came in after the corruption charges that was meant to improve
and
upon
significant
all of this.
Compliance reform. And all that gets lost in the message because the message is being overtaken by this Trudeau and whistleblowing saga.
All right. Lots to watch for. Richard, thanks for your perspective.
My
as
pleasure.
always. Richard Leblanc, professor at York University, with the latest on the SNC story.